who knows our speaker quite well, and she will do the introduction. Please welcome.
I've known him for 72 years today. It's his birthday. It's Bill Frelick. He's my brother. He went to Brandywine. We grew up here. Went off to Oberlin College. He founded the Amnesty International College Network, which was the first time Amnesty was able to really operate on college campuses throughout the country. He was on the board of Amnesty right after college when it got the Nobel Peace Prize. So he has been involved with human rights for most of his life. After working at Amnesty, then he went off to be with U.S. Committee for Refugees, which was not part of the United States, but a private nonprofit. And then he worked for Amnesty again, and now he's worked with Human Rights Watch and for the last 20 years. And he is now the director of the Refugee and Migrant Division. Close enough. Anyway, but he's internationally recognized in the refugee world. He has testified before Congress. He has represented refugee rights in Geneva for United Nations. He has challenged Charleston on television, which was, as well as other notable things. So I'm really glad you all came, and I'd like to welcome my brother to give his stuff.
Thank you.
Meeting tonight.
Here, Arden. It's always been a favorite place. And I'm going to start with a little sort of propaganda video, if you will, for Human Rights Watch, but it gives a setting. I'm going to focus on refugees and immigrants, and particularly what we're facing here in the United States, but my work is global. So there's, this is only what I'll talk about tonight is a fraction of all the things that are going on in the world. But this should give you a taste of sort of the broader picture, including some of the work that I'm doing as well. So we'll start with this as hopefully something that will get the scene started.
The human rights movement is at a critical point, but the progress of human rights has never been linear, and the commitment to their protection has never been even. I know you're worried. We are too. With crises raging around the world and authoritarian threats emerging in places you never expected, maybe you're asking yourself, what can we do? How can we push back? At Human Rights Watch, we have been combating autocratic regimes and protecting civilians for nearly 50 years. Wherever a leader grabs power or abuses people's rights, we are there to hold the line. The threats and powers we face are new and farther reaching than anything we've seen in our lifetimes. We are at a crucial moment in the fight for human rights.
I'm here with a group of migrants who were unlawfully deported by the United States. They were shackled by their wrists onto their waists with leg irons.
Pushing back against unjust policies,
and you can't have a trial for all of these people,
is at the heart of Human Rights Watch's work to defend democracy and protect vulnerable populations around the world.
This area urgently needs food to come in and humanitarian aid to come in.
And we know we can't do it alone. From Bosnia to Alabama, Human Rights Watch partners with movements and leaders from around the world, because our work depends on all of us. We never underestimate what we can do when we come together to demand our rights, even if it takes time.
Police in the Philippines.
Is on a plane. La policía ha detenido a
Former President Rodrigo Duterte ay nasa loob.
Just a few weeks ago, former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte was arrested and transferred to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. This historic arrest on charges of crimes against humanity follows years of dogged reporting and advocacy by my colleagues.
Thousands of Filipinos have been killed in President Rodrigo Duterte's so-called war on drugs.
And it shows us that the powerful can still be held accountable.
Dito sa TV, sa titindugan ako, nagpasalamat ko.
Was that in the Philippines where they would just like if anybody was even suspected, they would just assassinate them?
Yeah, probably.
Like we did for Iraqis that were tortured by US forces, because legacies of trauma repeat without justice.
Even though 20 years have passed, there is no time limit on justice.
We've come to Parliament Hill today to urge Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to get Canada on the path of abolishing immigration detention.
We secured groundbreaking wins against the use of provincial jails to ensure that migrants and asylum seekers were no longer wrongfully incarcerated, including upon arrival in Canada.
And that motion does pass with unanimous support.
And our work is ongoing.
Vient de déclarer capitaine Moussa Dadis Camara coupable des faits de crimes contre l'humanité sur la base de la
I'm on board the Geo Barents in the central Mediterranean Sea, following their rescue of more than 200 people.
And now we are pushing with European leaders for humane immigration policies.
And we are here to deliver a petition on behalf of European citizens to ask Frontex to do more to save lives at sea.
We constantly adapt and bring in new tools, employing innovative strategies to ensure impact and progress.
The Digital Investigations Lab used this information, analyzing satellite imagery, as well as the shadows in each video, to verify the location and timing.
So when people ask us, what can be done? How is Human Rights Watch meeting this moment? My answer is, we will do what works, combining 5 decades of experience holding the line while innovating in real time.
Did anybody explain to you what your rights were?
We will establish facts and evidence of abuses, and we will hold power to account. Because the facts still matter. Working with local activists and movements, we will bring the fight to abusive leaders wherever they are in the world. Because in 5 decades of fighting authoritarianism and global level threats, what we have learned is that it takes each of us doing our part. Not one group, not one movement, not one leader, all of us.
Okay, so I'm supposed to stand at one spot for the Zoom people, and I want to make sure I'm projecting. So if you don't hear me in the back, start waving your hands. If I'm speaking too fast, tell me to slow down. Whatever we need to do that make sure that everyone's communicating. And for the Zoom techies, let me know if I'm out of the picture or whatever as well. Okay, hopefully all the technical stuff is over with. Hello, happy to be here. What I'm going to do tonight is talk about the Dirty Dozen. These are 12 of the most harmful policies of the Trump 2.0 administration with respect to refugees and immigrants. You'll see a lot of overlap between them. But it paints a picture of an administration that really, for all of its chaoticness, if that's a word, generally speaking, on so many issues where the administration seems to be bouncing around. In one area, it seems to just have latched on and to have really a comprehensive attack, and that really is with respect to immigrants and refugees. So we're really up against quite a challenge. What I want to do first is to set a little bit of the stage, a little mini history for you. And again, the United States obviously with hypocrisy and without consistency, nevertheless, from World War II onward, has really been, until now, the leader in setting international norms for refugee protection, the leader in refugee resettlement, resettling more refugees than all the other countries of the world combined, the leader in providing humanitarian assistance to refugees and refugee camps all around the world. And this really reached the high watermark, if you will, in the Obama administration, just in September 2016, just months before the November election, which brought Donald Trump to power for the first term. On the margins of the General Assembly, Obama called for a leaders' conference on refugees worldwide.
You want to watch it?
No,
Because I mean, it's just somebody, shoot.
Well, my feeling is that nobody said they have to come in legally. It's the only thing.
It's an
I'm not-
awkward thing on Zoom down here, so.
Okay, not sure what happened.
We stand at an historical juncture.
All right. Where was I? Oh, so basically, the U.S. pledged to up the number of refugees to be resettled, and to get other countries to pledge the same, increased by billions of dollars the amount of money for humanitarian assistance, and then what happened just a few weeks later was Trump was elected president on the campaign of in the presidential debate, actually saying the refugee resettlement was like a Trojan horse, that would bring terrorists into the country, and of course he was elected president. Immediately brought about the travel ban and the suspension of refugee resettlement, and what followed from that was Remain in Mexico, which basically people had to stay in Mexico while their asylum claims were being processed in the United States, and many other problems in the first Trump administration, which was a tremendous setback and very difficult to deal with at the time, but nothing compared to what we're dealing with now. What the Biden administration did was to try to do what they thought at the time was this grand bargain. Basically, the thought in the Trump administration was wanting to control irregular movement across the border, seeing that was problematic as it was, and wanting to create legal pathways for people so that they wouldn't cross the border illegally. It came about sort of, in various stages. Of course, starting with the fall of Kabul and the parole of about 75,000 Afghan refugees. Yes.
I think you said Trump, I think you meant Biden.
Oh, Biden. I'm sorry. I do mean Biden. The Biden administration was working on safe and legal pathways, starting with the parole of the Afghan refugees that came in with the fall of Kabul. And again, there was a need for an immediate response. 75,000 people were brought to this country. Many of them had, worked directly with the United States and feared persecution directly at the hands of the Taliban, very similar to what happened with the fall of Saigon in 1975. Shortly thereafter, you had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and about 250,000 Ukrainians that were offered parole to come into the United States, which was part of international responsibility sharing or burden sharing, with millions of Ukrainian refugees throughout Europe as well. And so 250,000 seemed like a relatively easy number for the US to take. But in terms of equity and thinking about what was happening on the southern border, the use of parole was expanded to include 4 other nationalities: Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And so there were parole programs specifically for those 4 nationalities who had been crossing the border illegally, irregularly. And after the parole programs went into effect, the numbers of irregular border crossers from those nationalities fell to almost nothing, 1%, 2%. So it was quite a successful parole program, which essentially allowed people to come into the country and then to have their asylum claims heard, and in some cases to get what was called temporary protected status. Now, this involved hundreds of thousands of people. I mentioned the 75,000 Afghans, the 250,000 Ukrainians. The Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan program brought in about 530,000 people. And the temporary protected status, which applied to nationality groups, is basically saying, we're not going to deport you, you'll get work authorization, and we can, decide at some point to examine your asylum claims. This isn't permanent. You can't adjust status from this. And many of the people on parole got temporary protected status. So there's some double counting here, but that was 864,000 people that got temporary protected status of various nationalities. The problem, as we all know, is that it wasn't just a matter of controlling irregular border crossing. The numbers themselves were numbers that the US public were not happy with. And Trump was elected a second time, and largely on the basis of the immigration policy and the Biden approach, which had been to say, he put in very strict regulations, a regulation called the circumvention of legal pathways. So if you didn't go through the legal pathway, the Biden administration actually came down very hard on you. And it was very hard even to be able to lodge an asylum claim. But basically, there was big avenues to enable people to come in and seek protection to the United States. What Donald Trump did on January 1st of the second administration, January 20th, Inauguration Day, was he put out a slew of executive orders. The primary executive order, the one that, and let me see if I can get my PowerPoint started here. Tell me, how do I start the PowerPoint? How do I get rid of the video and start the PowerPoint? You may have to come here and do that. See my emails.
There you go.
Nothing very exciting, I'm sorry to say. Okay, can we get a full screen on that? Oh, we are getting full screen.
It's full screen there.
Okay, and then how do I advance it?
Just click on there.
Click on here, okay. All right. So what happened at the outset was this foundational executive order that said there was an invasion. The word invasion was used, an invasion of our southern border by aliens. So you think of the invasion of the body snatchers or something, science fiction film, and what that did was it put the U.S. on this emergency footing, war footing. The idea that normal rules don't apply any longer, that this is such an emergency that we're thinking of this in wartime terms, and we can suspend many of the civil liberties and human rights that we think of as would take place under normal conditions. And in fact, invoking the Alien Enemies Act from 1798. This was the John Adams administration, the second administration of the U.S. history, and the Aliens and Sedition Act, which were infamous at the time. And in fact, many of them were taken away. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word. And right at the time, this one stayed on the books. It was only invoked 3 times in American history, all with congressional declared wars. And this was the first time it was invoked, and it was invoked right away for a group of Venezuelans who were accused of being gang members based oftentimes on very superficial tattoos or whatever they might be. And they were sent off to the Seco prison in El Salvador, where they were tortured and otherwise abused. I'll come back to that in some more detail later. One of the things the same executive order did was to say that the border was basically closed to asylum seekers, and that in fact you could no longer seek asylum in the United States if it meant that it would delay by even a day the amount of time that you would be spending in the United States itself. So this really, when you think about all the other 11 of the dirty dozen that I'm going to be talking about, this is really the starting point of what ended up happening. The second thing is mandatory detention. The idea that for the entire process, from the time that you are apprehended by immigration enforcement officers, whether it be the Border Patrol or Interior ICE, that you will remain in detention to the maximum extent possible, the executive order said, until your case is resolved, preferably with your deportation. This goes against, again, international norms have been gradually moving in the direction of no immigration detention. The technologies are such that being able to use various alternatives to detention mean that, again, when you think about detention, it's an administrative detention. These are not people that have been charged or sentenced for or punished for a particular crime. It's people held administratively for the purpose of their removal. And if you can affect their removal by holding them for only the briefest period of time, that's all that's necessary to do. So holding people for months and months and months, really there's no legitimate basis for doing that under international standards, or even the standards that were evolving in the United States itself, because we were moving in the direction of, and whether you liked it or not, ankle monitors and other ways of surveilling people, making sure that they could be tracked, and people were not able to abscond because they could be caught if they did. And if you have a system that's working and people have confidence in it also, and they feel that they have a chance, they're going to show up for their hearings in any case, and you'll see what happens. But mandatory detention went into effect, and on top of that, an order went through in July of last year that ended bonding by immigration judges. So the discretion to be able to say, look, we can bond somebody out, that was taken away. That's under court challenge at the moment, but a whole lot of habeas corpus petitions have been put into the courts to try to work on that issue as well. Number 3, expedited removal didn't even exist until the 1996 Immigration Act. And basically at that time, the idea was that we wanted a way to quickly be able to turn around people that had just arrived at the border and not have them go into the longer term system before immigration judges and courts and everything. So low-level immigration officers were essentially able to expedite the case, to quicken it up for people that had just arrived, and to turn people around quickly, basically, to deport them, send them, put them back on the next plane. It gradually then, increased. It went from being within, I think, 10 miles of the border, along the border itself, to within 10 miles of the border, and then 2 weeks. Under the Trump administration 2.0, this administration, it expanded to anyone that's been in the country for 2 years and anywhere in the country at all, anywhere in the interior of the country, will be put into expedited removal at this point. So that means that all those people that were paroled in under the Biden administration within that 2-year period, they would all be subject essentially to expedited removal. And going back to the mandatory detention, they're going to be detained while they're in this expedited removal. With the numbers, the word expedited is, a little wishy-washy as well, because people are going to end up being detained for longer periods of time. Expedited just means you're not going to have due process during that period of time that you're actually waiting in detention and getting moved from detention center to detention center. So I talked about Biden creating safe and legal pathways. And that was something that, in the first flurry of executive orders, within the first day, the Trump administration terminated that parole program that I talked about for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, stopped it in its tracks. He went country by country as temporary protected status, attacked that for every country that you could think of. Think of the criteria for temporary protected status. It's in the law, it's in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's for ongoing armed conflict, it's for generalized violence, it's for these extraordinary conditions of general unsafety in a country that makes it unsafe to send anyone back there. The asylum system is specifically for people who meet the refugee definition. You've probably heard of it, a well-founded fear of persecution based on your race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. But TPS, temporary protected status, basically says you don't need to meet that high standard of that you're being, I want to persecute you because of your religion, or persecute you because of your political opinion, or persecute you because you're gay. This is basically saying anyone to return to this country is going to be in danger, and we recognize that. And so countries like Syria and Afghanistan and Haiti got temporary protected status. And the Trump administration went after every one of those, each one as they came up. There's a case pending in the Supreme Court right now. It's going to be the oral arguments, I think, are on April 29th, so just about a week from now. And it involves the determination of temporary protected status for Haitians and Syrians. You think about Haiti in particular, this is a country that is essentially an anarchy. It doesn't have a functioning government. Gangs are running the place. It's extremely violent. And if there's ever a case of a country that's just the epitome of a country that needs temporary protected status, it would be Haiti. And yet the order has been there to terminate it since February 3rd. And we will see what the Supreme Court ends up doing. Fingers crossed on that one. I'm jumping ahead. So let me go through the other thing. CBP-1, I should have mentioned at the outset. So CBP-1 is an app on your telephone. And it's an app that enabled people to make an appointment to say at a certain point in time, I want to go to the port of entry, and I'll be able to make an appointment and have an asylum hearing, a screening, to be able to determine whether I can enter into the United States or not. Under the under the Biden administration, 960,000 people, nearly 1 million people, use the CBP-1 app. So it's a very large number of people that came into the United States, that came into the asylum system, which meant that the asylum backlog really grew, and this was a problem. But the CBP-1 app was something that, again, was used as one of those very important pathways for protection for many people, and I'll talk about a particular case a little bit later on. That was ended on day one, on Inauguration Day. Also, the U.S. had established what were called safe mobility offices throughout Latin America, in Colombia, and Costa Rica, and Ecuador, and Guatemala. These were offices where people, instead of going through the route, going through Mexico, going into the hands of criminals, going through the Darien Gap in Panama, you could actually go to an office. If you were Venezuelan, you could go to an office in Colombia. If you were a Salvadoran, you could go to an office in Costa Rica. And you could apply for refugee status from one of those offices. Those were all closed down on day one by the administration. And in addition to that, the Trump administration indefinitely suspended all refugee resettlement around the world. Refugee resettlement, which you remember, Obama had increased the numbers to be resettled. Under the last year of the Biden administration, the U.S. admitted 125,000 refugees. These were mostly people that had been living in refugee camps for years and years and years. Somali refugees in Kenya, Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, refugees in many, many countries around the world that the U.S. screened overseas and went through an extremely rigorous vetting procedure and admitted to the United States, and many of them would be sponsored by faith organizations, churches and synagogues and temples here in the United States. and people were helped. And this program goes back to the Vietnam War era program that has saved millions of lives, really, over all these decades, and helped to leverage other countries to also do refugee resettlement. And so, the US example is extremely important worldwide. So the entire program was indefinitely suspended with the idea that we're just not going to resettle any refugees at all. About 17 days after the inauguration, 17 days later, this is at a time when Elon Musk is running roughshod over the federal government, Elon Musk being from South Africa himself, essentially whispered in Trump's ear about white Afrikaners in South Africa as being a persecuted group in Africa, which was ludicrous in terms of, like, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees that runs refugee camps all over the world and refers for resettlement refugees that, of those 25 million refugees around the world, 1 or 2% of them say these people need to be resettled. They had zero. They were no white South Africans. They were not sitting in Namibia or in Botswana or some other place. They didn't exist. There were no refugees out there. And yet the one exception for all refugee resettlement in the world, of all the groups I've talked about and many, many more, was only for white South Africans. And so now there's a number from 125,000 refugee admissions worldwide. We're down to 7,500 this year that's reserved for white South Africans, and now they've expanded it to Europeans, you can guess at the race, who are persecuted because they are opposed to immigrants coming into Europe. So again, you think of sort of the irony of this, the idea that xenophobic movements in Europe that are anti-immigrant would get their immigration status in the United States, refugee status no less, for that reason. Anyway, there we are. But essentially, all of the safe and legal pathways to entry for as refugees, as parolees, and under temporary protected status are either gone or would be gone, except for court challenges that are still pending and could be reversed. Depending on how the Supreme Court rules by this summer, we'll know whether there's any chance for temporary protected status to remain for people who desperately need it. So I think I've been pretty frank that the Biden administration, in allowing nearly 1 million people to come in with CBP-1 applications and over 500,000 people coming in through parole programs, the system was dysfunctional, the asylum backlog was immense, and the resources were not there to process the claims. And Congress was not willing to put in the resources to put in immigration judges and USCIS asylum officers and the other infrastructure that you'd need to make the function work. And yet what happened with the Republican Congress under the Trump administration with the big, beautiful bill, the BBB bill, was to put like $170 billion, that's with a B, not an M, $1 billion into immigration enforcement over a 4-year period. And immediately $90 billion, B again, $1 billion into specific enforcement, with about $45 billion going to ICE for detention centers, to build more detention centers, to build warehouses, and another $45.6 billion, I think it was, for building the wall on the border, and for CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, the Border Patrol, to do greater enforcement as well. Plus a sort of an all-of-government shifting of resources. So when you look at the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, of the arms tobacco help me out, even the IRS, they were seconding and putting people into immigration enforcement from basically all these other agencies of the federal government. And you've probably heard of, Alligator Alcatraz in Florida that Governor DeSantis built. Does any of you know where the money for that came from? This detention center, FEMA. So that was, money that was intended for like hurricane relief and natural disasters. The money was reprogrammed. This is not even part of the big beautiful bill. This is money taken away from, disaster relief basically, and put into detention and more detention. And we're seeing sprouting out now with this huge amount of money available to the federal government, the buying of these enormous warehouses in various places around the country. And again, there's a lot of effort to block this through protest movements and through litigation. We'll see, what ends up happening. But there's money to burn by the administration, and it's burning through quite a bit of money. And the resources, when you think about, if you had during the Biden administration, if you had put a fraction of that money, into making the system work, into making protection work, you might have had a chance at a functioning asylum system. But as it is now, we've got an enforcement system on steroids with essentially a blank check. And I won't even get into the corruption issues, but bags of money going around with private contracting, prison contractors and others. It's really quite obscene. And it's not just having private contractors; it's using the U.S. military. And so Guantanamo, which was used back in the 90s for Haitians and Cubans. I was there on a number of occasions, and then was used during the War on Terror under George W. Bush, and waterboarding and all kinds of torture and whatnot happened there. We at Human Rights Watch, we've documented the treatment of the Venezuelans that were sent to Guantanamo. We've interviewed them. Most of them are now back of that first group are back in Venezuela. We did do a report on the abuses at Guantanamo for immigrants, for refugees. And the largest detention center currently, immigration detention center in the United States, anyone know? Fort Bliss. Fort Bliss, it's a fort in Texas, and that is the largest immigration detention center in the United States. And on top of that, again, I'm not sure if you know national defense areas. Do you know what the national defense area is? Okay, so what has been declared is that there's this strip of land on the US-Mexico border has been declared a military base, essentially. It's a fictional military base. It doesn't really exist. But what it means is that if you cross the border irregularly, illegally, which would be a minor infraction, normally speaking, now it means you're trespassing onto a US military base. And so they're creating a criminality through this fiction, and thousands of people that have now dared to cross the US-Mexico border are being prosecuted for trespassing onto a US military base that's not really a military base at all. But it's this national defense area that is treated like a military base for purposes of criminalizing border crossing. And what I've seen, what you saw on the video, where you saw me talking about the people that were being shackled and sent off to Panama, those were all military flights. Those are using the military for those flights. And using the National Guard in Los Angeles and other places in support, as we've seen in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. The 287G is this part of the law that allows the deputizing of local police forces. And so It's not enough that you have ICE itself doing arrests, but working now is the notion of immigration enforcement as a federal responsibility is now being transferred over to state and local officials, basically, that can do now immigration enforcement, which is completely outside of what they had been allowed to do in the past. Overtly, under this is sort of goes under the area of what's called prosecutorial discretion, where, you know, police can decide whether to arrest somebody or not. And under the Biden administration, there was a memo, there was an order to ICE to basically say, you know, you shouldn't go into schools, you shouldn't go into churches and synagogues and temples, you shouldn't go into hospitals to arrest people. There should be sort of certain areas that are off limits for immigration enforcement. Courtrooms. You shouldn't go into the courthouse where people are showing up, they're coming in voluntarily to make their case, or because they've been victimized by somebody and they're going to seek justice. Don't arrest them on immigration grounds there. I mean, what will that do for people that need, you know, the protection of our court system? And that order, that memo was reversed. And so now, you know, you can be arrested inside a church, you can be arrested in a hospital, and courtrooms are one of the target areas for the Trump administration to go in as people are going in for their check-ins, as they're going in, reporting going for their asylum hearings, they're getting arrested before they have a chance to open their mouths. And some of the judges that have, like, you know, tried to help people themselves have been prosecuted for doing that. And then there's the Perdomo case. So there was a court order in Los Angeles just before the Minneapolis horrors happened. This was happening in Los Angeles, where there was a surge, a campaign, a push for ICE arrests in Los Angeles. And a court ordered saying that this involved broad racial profiling. The case didn't go through the normal appellate process, but the Trump administration, using what's called the emergency docket, had it go straight to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically threw out the judge's order and said that, and it was Judge Kavanaugh that made the decision, and basically said, look, you can, and I'm quoting Kavanaugh here, the apparent ethnicity of the person is a relevant factor in determining whether there's a reasonable basis for arresting them. And the Supreme Court had allowed these sweeps to take place. Sonia Sotomayor, in dissent, wrote, and I'm quoting from Sotomayor, we should not live in a country when, I can't read my own handwriting here, oh, here. We should not live in a country when the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work at a low-wage job. She just last week, you may know, apologized to Kavanaugh for having said that in her dissent and having called him out. Again, a lot of commentators on what you need to do, looking at the TPS vote to come, looking at the birthright citizenship votes to come, and how you're calculating the 9 votes on the Supreme Court and not wanting to alienate Kavanaugh and thinking that he may be a critical vote. Sotomayor sort of walked back what she said, which is plain and simple. This is racial profiling and doesn't belong as anything that is consistent with the values of this country. The picture that I have here on this 8th dirty of the dirty dozen, turning immigration judges into deportation judges, is a picture of the Justice Department. And the banner that's on the Justice Department is a Stalin-like banner of Donald Trump on the Department of Justice that goes when you when you're on Pennsylvania Avenue and you look up and that's what you see. The Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is where the immigration judges sit, is not part of the judiciary. It's in the three branches of government. It's not in the judicial branch. It's in the executive branch. So immigration judges are employees of the Attorney General. And their boss is the executive. It is Donald Trump and the Attorney General. And they serve at the pleasure of the President and the Attorney General. And the first thing that the administration did was the Board of Immigration. So you have immigration judges. They fired 100 immigration judges right off the bat. And this is at a time, again, thinking about deporting people. You think you'd want to have as many immigration judges on hand as you could have. And the first thing they do is fire 100 judges. Well, essentially, it was a purge. It was a political purge of judges that had ruled mostly in greater part in favor of the immigrants that were seeking asylum or whatever relief they were seeking, and those were given their pink slips. Then you have the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is at the executive level. It actually decides on sort of the precedents before they would go to the appellate level into the judiciary. And that makes your precedents for how immigration judges operate until the Supreme Court, tells them differently through that other appellate system. And there are 28 members of the Board of Immigration Appeals, 28 judges. And the first thing that the administration did was it fired all but 15 of them. And all of the Biden appointees were fired right at the outset. And so let me just tell you two BIA, Board of Immigration Appeals decisions that have now happened under this new Board of Immigration Appeals. The first one was a case in which, so I mentioned that the refugee definition is a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion. The idea of LGBT people and women who are persecuted has always fallen into membership in a particular social group. All right, because the Refugee Convention in 1951 and the laws of implementing states like the United States, took that language. And so it's always been interpreted. It's been interpreted for decades that, if you're persecuted because you're gay, if you're persecuted because you're a woman, it's because you're a member of a particular social group. Well, the Board of Immigration Appeals under this administration has said that women are no longer a cognizable social group. So ladies, women, you ain't recognized. And so when you think about like the Taliban persecuting women in various and sundry ways, that's not a basis for claiming asylum in the United States anymore. And just on January 9th, there was a case in which the applicant had the actual multiple death threats and had the notices and the evidence of the death threats had included bullets on the death threats. And the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is like the gold standard of, if you're an immigration lawyer, it's like, wow, usually you have to sort of infer by their actions what the persecutor's motivations are. Here it was clear as day. It was a death threat. And the Board of Immigration Appeals said death threats are not persecution. Essentially, the only conclusion you could draw from that is the only way you could prove that you're deserving of asylum is actually to be a successful death threat, that you're killed, and then you might be eligible at that point. Now I want to talk a fair amount about third country removals, because this is something I've been particularly involved in myself. Usually, when people are deported, they're deported to their home country. Their home country has responsibility for them, takes responsibility for them, and that's the way that it works. what the Trump administration has been doing has been deporting people not to their home countries and not to like safe third countries, which is another concept entirely, but picking places, oftentimes the most dangerous places they can think of, and deporting people to those places. So taking these Venezuelans and deporting them to the Seco prison in El Salvador, where they were tortured. And we documented that torture. We were the main researchers that were providing the research for the 60 Minutes story that the administration tried to kill and actually delayed for some time. If you go and see that, you'll see that Human Rights Watch is interviewed in that story, and it's information that we've helped to provide to the litigators in the Abrego Garcia case and others to try to bring people back. The cases that I've been personally most involved in, I was in both Panama and in Costa Rica. And I want to tell you a little bit about the work that I've done in those countries, in Panama in particular. So this is a picture of some of the people that I met, some of the people that I worked with. It's actually the cover of my report. It's the photo of the cover of my report. These were people who crossed into the United States after January 20th and were immediately taken, and they were put into incommunicado detention in the United States. They were, as I said, they were shackled at the waist and on the ankles, put in military planes, and dumped into Panama, dumped into Costa Rica, and now they're dumped into various African countries and other places as well. I interviewed people from Iran, from China, from Russia, from Cameroon, from Eritrea, from refugee-producing countries, Afghanistan. And these were people that were very fearful and had very strong refugee claims. I interviewed them. I spent many, many hours interviewing these people. I'll tell you a little bit about how that came about. So we were, as soon as we found out that the plane had left, we immediately tried to get permission to go. They were initially held in a hotel in Panama City, and then they were moved to the Darien, this jungle area, very, very, very bad area in southern Panama, malaria infested and somewhat lawless. And they were put in a detention center there. As far as they knew, they weren't hearing from anyone. They were being held incommunicado. They thought they'd be there for the rest of their lives, potentially. Many of them, about 100, so 300 people were deported in these planes. About 180 voluntarily repatriated. They went back, including people going back to Russia and other places where we knew they had very strong claims. We worked with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to push Panama to release them. We were doing the same, doing various interventions and seeking to be able to go there to see them ourselves. We got word that we would get permission to go to the detention center simultaneously with them agreeing to release them from the detention center. So we knew that they were going to be put on a bus and then sent to Panama City and just dumped on the street of Panama City. That's where they were being dumped. As soon as I heard about it, I booked the next airplane and flew from BWI Airport to Panama City and rushed to get to where they were coming in on bus. And we found a donor that actually helped to buy hotel, to rent hotel rooms for them for the night, to put up 50, 100 people, because otherwise they would have gone into the woodwork. There's nothing waiting for them. Again, people that were Chinese, that didn't speak a word of Spanish, that had no idea where they were, and being dumped in Panama City in one of the dodgiest parts, as a lot of bus stations where they're located. This was not a safe place at all. And there were, young women that would have been very much at the hands of predators that are sitting there waiting for them. Anyway, we found them, we kept them together, we sheltered them, we worked with the Catholic Church to find a shelter to put them in. And then we proceeded with the interviews. And I'll tell you one story. This is and I have a video maybe at the end we'll show. I don't want to take the time to work over all the technicalities of it at the moment. But this is an Iranian Christian woman, a young woman, who fled from Iran to Turkey. She converted to Christianity, which is potentially a capital offense in her country. But she feared her father and her uncle were the ones that were going to do her harm for that purpose. She fled to Turkey. They followed her to Turkey. And the only country that she could get a visa for that she could flee to was Brazil. She went to Brazil. She went through the Darien Gap, very, very difficult. And then she got to Mexico. And remember the CBP-1 application, the CBP-1 app, she was one of those people. She had an appointment on the CBP-1 app. The appointment was for January 31st at 4:30 p.m. at the Nogales crossing point. And she had never broken the law in her life. She waited. January 20th came once. She could have crossed before January 20th, but she waited for her appointment. However, on January 20th, Trump ended all the CBP-1 appointments. And so she was left, what do I do now? So she was in northern Mexico at that point. There were cartels there. There were, again, predators that she was fearful of. She didn't know what to do. She finally decided on February 3rd to cross the border, immediately to put up her hands, immediately to say refugee, immediately to say asylum, which she did. And she was handcuffed, she was put into detention, incommunicado, not able to speak to a lawyer or anything else, and put on that military plane and sent to Panama. And I'm working now with people that have been sent to various African countries, and we did the same thing in Costa Rica. But that just gives you a little taste of what I've seen. Travel bans, I mentioned in the first Trump administration, the travel ban, which was for 6 or 7 countries, it's now 39 countries plus the Palestinian Authority are on the travel ban in various levels of travel ban, and then other restrictions on legal immigration, like H-1B visas for highly skilled workers, $100,000. And so you're thinking, okay, well, Silicon Valley can afford that. No, Human Rights Watch, we need people that speak like the Rohingya language. There aren't too many Americans that do. We need to hire people with those kinds of skills, and we don't have $100,000 to hire them. And so, and at the same time, if you have $1 million and you want to get a Trump gold visa, just pay your way and you can enter with no problem at all. And there are many other restrictions of legal immigration that are happening. I think everyone here is pretty much familiar with the issue with birthright citizenship, so I won't dwell on it. But basically, in international law terms as well, we are parties to the conventions on statelessness, on the reduction of statelessness, and we're potentially creating stateless people through the ending of birthright citizenship. It has a lot of ripple effects, and we'll see again, it's now up to the Supreme Court. And many of the things I've talked about have been challenged by lower courts, and we've succeeded in many, many cases. For example, I mentioned on the very first slide the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, the one that was invoked for the transfer of the Venezuelans to the Secot prison. Well, the invocation of that act was blocked by none other than the Second Circuit, the one in Texas, very, very conservative, probably the most conservative appellate level. It's a 2-to-1 vote by the judges here. It's going to go to the full panel, go to the Supreme Court, so we don't know as it moves up what will happen. But it gives you some idea of success in the lower courts doesn't guarantee success in the higher ones. And finally, the last of the dirty dozen that I want to share with you is that, and here you see on the slide, they're dismantling the U.S. Agency for International Development. The words on the side of the building are being pried off in this photo. USAID is shut down completely. USAID had provided all that humanitarian assistance to refugee camps around the world, to internally displaced people, had done a huge amount of good in the world. The Bureau for Population, Refugees, Migration, which I've worked very closely with for decades, eviscerated basically, and the only people left are the ones that are willing to resettle white South Africans, basically. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that about 11 million refugees around the world are being hit by the cuts in humanitarian assistance. The Rohingya refugee camp, the Kutupalong camp in Bangladesh, food rations have gone down from $9 a month per person to about $4 to $5 a month per person to sustain people in places where they're not allowed to work and they're completely dependent on international aid. I could go on and on, but the ripple effect also with other countries. So the U.S. says, the answer is, take care of our own first and don't bother anyone else, because the U.S. isn't taking care of its own either. But basically, the message to other countries is build your own walls, push people back. If you don't want refugee camps, there's an easy solution, just get rid of them. So I don't want to leave you with just the dirty dozen. I've mentioned litigation a lot, and we are fighting litigation. We work closely with litigators. Many of the cases that people that I've interviewed are plaintiffs in the class action suits that are going forward. But we're not putting all of our hopes there. We are appealing to the public, and we are appealing to members of Congress and to anyone that will help to resist these dirty dozen and more policies that are taking place. But I want to emphasize five points of what we do and how we approach this that I think apply to all of you and to everyone that wants to resist, to stand up for justice and mercy. Let's say both. First is we fight dehumanization. We want to humanize the story. We want to tell human stories. We want to, like the story that I told you about this young Iranian Christian woman. It's real. It's not just an abstract principle. These are real people, and you can't just, call them poison Skittles and be done with it. You can't just say they're eating dogs and cats and dehumanize them. These are, real people. They're for the grace of God go I people. You could put yourself in their shoes, and we need to convince the American people that these are regular people like you and me, oftentimes without control over situations like gang violence in Haiti, and they have no choice but to seek protection outside their country. Secondly, we appeal to fairness. You can talk about human rights principles and international law and conventions and treaties and everything else, but kids on the playground, one of the first sentences out of their mouth is, "That's not fair." And it's built into our DNA, I think, as human beings, that we know what's fair. We know if something's fair or not. And a lot of human rights just boils down to, when you see what I've presented to you, what should be screaming to you is, that's not fair. It's just not fair. Why are people that do the right thing, why are people that show up for their court hearings getting arrested and bound and chained and put onto planes? Next, we believe in transparency. If things are happening in smoke-filled rooms, if the border czar is going into fast food restaurants and coming out with bags of cash, you know something's not quite right. All right? Shine a light on it. Be transparent ourselves. We're transparent in our methodology. We're very open about how we do the work that we do, how we're funded. We don't take any government money whatsoever. We're completely funded by private donors like yourselves, and we're very happy if anyone would like to donate to Human Rights Watch. Go to our webpage and please do. And that's how we work. And we're transparent, but we demand transparency of our targets as well. We want to be very open, and there are no secrets between us. Fourth, we believe in facts. We are fact finders. We go, we interview people, we triangulate information, we corroborate information, we deal in facts. When we say that somebody's being tortured at the Safe prison, we have the evidence to show it. And what we're seeing in the levels of the national intelligence, at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, at the Aeronautics Administration, in place after place after place, facts don't matter according to the administration, and we need to challenge the facts. And when we look at what we do every year is our annual report on human rights practices of every country around the world. The State Department does its own report, and history will judge, and ultimately the users will judge. Are they going to, this year, are they going to turn to the Trump administration State Department report on El Salvador, or Human Rights Watch's report on human rights conditions in El Salvador? Which one do you think is more objective? Which one is more factual? And truth will out at the end. And finally, fifth, we are fearless. We don't like bullies. We don't like authoritarians. We're going to fight them. And we're going to go down swinging if we go down. But we're not going to stop for anything. We will stick to our principles with courage and conviction. And I hope all of you do the same.
Yay!
Q&A. And anyone that needs to leave, thank you for coming. Yes.
Why are people so afraid of immigrants? Is it that they're different from us? Or is it that they're afraid that they somehow will take jobs away from us? I mean,
there's a lot of manipulation, and you see it. You see fear-mongering and scapegoating are really, two of the tools of authoritarians, and Viktor Orban rode it to success and kept it going for 16 years, and thankfully people finally caught on and realized that it was a big lie, and hopefully Americans will see the same thing. And you can take, so one person commits a horrific crime. It's a horrific crime. They should be prosecuted for it. That doesn't, but the whole thing of scapegoating is you then use that to taint whatever that minority group is, and you tar everyone with the crime of one individual person. And and here again, objective facts show that immigrants are not taking jobs away. Immigrants actually help to expand gross domestic product, spur economic activity, pay into Social Security, where many immigrants are not actually collecting on the payroll taxes and Social Security that's taken out of their paychecks. I mean, there's huge amounts of evidence in terms of the economic benefits of immigration. That's not, I'm not here, I'm a human rights guy, I'm not here to talk about that, but look at the facts and look at the studies and see what the sort of the anti-immigrant rhetoric is and how it stands up to the facts, and it simply doesn't at the end of the day. Yes, I'm back.
I guess the question, I couldn't quite tell in terms of the Biden policies and where we're at exactly relative to that. So when I look up polls, 60% of Americans are against the Trump policies, but 70% of Americans were against Biden policies.
Yeah.
So two-part question. One, do you agree with the Biden policies? And even if you agree, what would you think that you would do differently to get 70% of Americans to agree with it?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So do I agree with the Biden policies? or, how might I have, tweaked them or whatever to make them
To
work.
get the majority of Americans.
Yeah, and that the polling, which he cites, and I may not remember the exact numbers, is that 60% of Americans oppose the immigration policies of the Trump administration, but 70% oppose the Biden immigration policies. So what do you do with that? The Biden idea was basically, we don't want people crossing the border irregularly. There's kind of agreement on that, that we want border controls, but we want to have safe and regular ways. So using the CBP One app, using parole, using resettlement, all ways of trying to manage this system. And one of the things to remember in the refugee context is when you look at refugee movements throughout history, it's people that are fleeing persecution and fleeing war and pouring across borders. The US has actually been lucky in many respects that, we've got oceans on two sides and Canada on one and Mexico on the other. Look at a country like Jordan that's got Iraq and Palestine and Syria, and it seems like a decade or a year doesn't go by without another influx coming in from another direction. Thailand similarly, Turkey similarly. And so, we look at countries like that and think that the system really that needs to function is one of what was called international responsibility sharing. It used to be called international burden sharing. But basically that to make that system work. Anyway, a lot of this is, how to make systems work. And one way, in the very long-term sense, is to make asylum work in those neighboring countries. So actually provide in Kenya, decent conditions, provide in Turkey decent conditions, provide in Mexico, for that matter, decent conditions, so that people that are fleeing from Somalia or Myanmar or El Salvador or Venezuela, will feel like they have a safe place to land and they won't feel compelled to move onward. And if they do move onward, then at that point, they could be treated like someone that's seeking immigration and not seeking protection. And you can deal with that in a different kind of way. I mentioned the safe third country concept, the idea that, okay, if it's really safe, then the person should seek asylum in that safe place. The reality is that many of the places that are declared to be safe are far from it, Turkey included, Mexico included. And so, you really have to look very carefully at, what that means. But I would say, address the root causes. Why are people fleeing in the first place? What's motivating them? Can you address the human rights violations, the war and peace kinds of questions? How can you maintain and improve what's called first asylum or asylum in the host countries? And then, what can we do to make the system work more efficiently and effectively and fairly in the United States? And the system was overwhelmed by numbers, which is true, but it was also resource starved. It didn't have nearly the capacity that it needed to keep up with those numbers. And so, when you think about the big beautiful bill and you think about putting $90 billion into immigration enforcement, if Congress had agreed to put that kind of funding into the Executive Office of Immigration Review and into having enough immigration judges to be functional, and have a deportation system that works efficiently with people that are found not to be in need of protection. I'm a human rights guy. I work for Human Rights Watch, but we're not against deportation. I mean, deportation, legal deportation, someone who's exhausted their domestic remedies, you can deport them. Deport them to their home country. Don't deport them to some place where they've never set foot and have no connections whatsoever. But do it in a just way and criteria that's transparent and recognizable and acceptable criteria, like the refugee definition itself, that would include women, by the way, if they're being persecuted. I hope I got the question. Okay,
Wasn't there a bill during the Biden administration that was going to be passed by Congress that Trump told the Republicans not to vote for?
Yeah, so that was,
Okay.
yeah, so there was the sort of the compromise bill, which was a bill that would have, that had a very strong enforcement money, with a lot of money that would have gone into the resources for the asylum corps and for immigration judges. It would have done both of those things. And Senator Lankford of Oklahoma, very conservative Republican senator, was one of the co-authors of that bill and supported it. And then he had to basically back down because Trump did not want that bill to pass. He wanted to be able to use immigration as a cudgel to get elected president, and his strategy worked because he was elected. But it was a complete manipulation of the US Senate, which actually had reached a bipartisan consensus. There's a lot of things in the bill that I didn't like, but that's the nature of compromise. And they had reached a compromise, and if the Senate had gone for it, the House would have gone for it as well. And we might not be where we are today in terms of presidential elections and everything else. So that was a critical moment. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes?
I'm not a lawyer, but I understand.
You're going to have to speak up.
I'm not a lawyer, but I understand the legal system in this country is partly premised on due process rights.
Yes.
Procedural due process.
Yes.
And I'm just guessing, I haven't followed all the cases. I know there are many different cases. And I know that there are things like class action suits, not as a protected group, but as a group of people who have had similar actions taken against them. And from what I understand, a huge number of lower district courts and appeals courts. And lawyers are smart. They do handle on words. And I wonder, has there been any attempt, ability to identify a certain class within this group to proceed, even using something like the great rid of habeas corpus?
So
are they protected in some senses by?
Okay, I hope I'm understanding your question well.
I'm not a lawyer.
Okay, well, let me try this.
Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, I'm going to try to rephrase the question. So the question is on due process, basically, which is, a constitutional guarantee in the United States. One of the problems, of course, is that while the Constitution really should apply to anyone that's in the country, there are things that we all think of as American citizens as being second nature due process, like the right to a court-appointed attorney. Any one of us that's a U.S. citizen that's accused of a minor crime, you have the right to a court-appointed attorney. If you can't afford an attorney of your own, you have your Miranda rights, and you get, you get an attorney. Immigrants faced with deportation, with life and death consequences of facing torture or execution, do not have the right to a court-appointed attorney in the United States. They don't have that right. They don't have that constitutional right. They don't have that human right, basically. And they're left to now people that don't speak English, that are not necessarily well educated, that certainly don't understand the convoluted, complex, difficult immigration laws, which are second only to the tax code in their complexity. And there was actually a 3-year-old that was before an immigration judge, and the immigration judge said that the 3-year-old was capable of representing himself. It is ludicrous. So when you talk about due process, we've got a long way to go, and this precedes the Trump administration. But on the Trump administration itself, the case that's going to be argued on April 29th before the Supreme Court, and I urge you all to tune in and see what the oral arguments are like. That is a procedural case. And the only chance for success they have, because the Supreme Court has already ruled in favor of the Trump administration on ending TPS for Venezuelans. So the cards look like they're stacked against the plaintiffs who want to maintain temporary protected status for Haitians and Syrians. But the case before the Supreme Court is basically that Kristi Noem just sent an email on a Friday afternoon to somebody at the State Department and said, should there be TPS? And this is one of her buddies that had also been appointed, because he had good MAGA credentials. And he said, sure, go ahead and terminate it. That was the extent of it. there's an amicus brief from like, 4 different previous heads of the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, all the people that have been involved, all the consultations and all the decision-making procedures that are set out in the APA, the American, the Procedures Act, I forget the first word. Anyway, so the procedural laws for the United States, where you have notices in the Federal Register, and you have the way the decisions are made, because that's the bureaucracy and how it functions. And this procedurally was completely, there was no procedure whatsoever. I mean, what I told you was the sum total of the procedure in ending TPS for Haitians, where, again, life and death for these people, and it was the most, casual sort of who cares response, with no consideration of human rights conditions in the country of origin or anything of the sort. So if we win this one, it will be precisely as something that the due process violations are so egregious that even the Supreme Court will say, no, you got to do a better job than that. And they are, rules-based court, so we'll see what they do with it.
Will that apply to just this one case?
Well, I mean, it will apply to that'll apply to about 300,000 Haitians, which is quite important, and a much smaller number of Syrians. But it also, I think, will signal to the administration that as other nationality groups come up for expiration of TPS, and they've already ended it for Afghanistan, they've ended it for a number of other countries, that it will put them on notice that they have to do a better job.
Let's take one last question
Yeah.
from one in the back, and then.
If by some miracle Donald is brought in front of like an international tribunal to face justice, are there like specific charges for specific crimes against humanity he could face, or is it also like spread out and just barely legal?
Yeah, that's a little bit outside of the work that I do. We do have an international criminal. Well, I mean, we actually have a division on international criminal justice. You saw about the case of Duarte from the Philippines. We've been to The Hague. We testify there. One of the things I should have mentioned on the legal immigration side is there's sanctions against the prosecutors and the judges in The Hague. The Rome Statute, it's for crimes against humanity and international justice, and the Trump administration is actually putting sanctions against those who are prosecuting war criminals and people who commit crimes against humanity, and the organizations that are testifying and supporting that work, which includes us. So we are potentially in the firing, in the crosshairs for the Trump administration because of the work that we do with the International Criminal Court, which, to get to your question, I don't really feel that I can answer. It's a little bit hypothetical, though. We did, like, for the George W. Bush administration, I mean, we did say that waterboarding was torture, and that this was a crime that was under the Convention Against Torture. Was a crime that the Bush administration and George W. Bush himself should have been held accountable for. So we hold leaders of countries accountable for their crimes, and